Hello, friends. Welcome back to the show. So glad to see you all once again. And if you're new here, this is the show that you've been looking for, because right now we're talking about each and every episode of Superman, the animated series. So if you're a fan of Superman or the animated series or cartoons from the 90s, then this is the show for you. We have new episodes coming out every Tuesday and Thursday, so be sure to hit that subscribe button. And while you're down there, go ahead and click the thumbs up. That helps me out tremendously. Today's a very fun episode as we talk about Prometheon, which originally aired on September 12th, 1997.
You have to see this for yourself.
I'd mentioned it in the last episode, but this is another great example of how the second season is really hitting their stride. These are the types of villains and the types of stories that Superman should be going up against: a giant monster. And this episode really does it well, and it has a great tone of the episode in facing off against Prometheon, which I guess is the name of the episode and the name of the creature, although it's never actually said in the episode. But there's so many great things about this episode, and we'll talk all about that right after our 60-second rundown of the episode. Let's see if I can do it in 60 seconds before the Brainiac bomb goes off. Here we go. A crew is in space with Superman to destroy this asteroid before it hits the planet. And Superman's up there and he's trying to place these explosives. And on the other side of the asteroid, they discover this huge monster strapped to the side of it. And as Superman turns the asteroid to direct it away from the planet, then it faces the sun and starts to grow and wake up and become more powerful and breaks free and falls to the earth. Hamilton deciphers a code to find out that the monster was part of this alien race, that they had created it to help with some of the heavy lifting, but it began to crave more heat and more energy as a fuel source, and goes off to try to find more of that. Now he's on Earth doing the same thing, finding power plants and things like that to try to absorb more power, and Superman's facing off against him until Hamilton and Superman come up with a plan to be able to lure the monster out into the ocean and freeze it. Ooh. Brainiac didn't get me this time.
Just get the job done, hero.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this the plot to Armageddon? Minus the monster, but going into space and having to destroy this asteroid before it destroys the planet. And it seems to me like Armageddon came out right around this time. There was also, side note, this is completely unrelated to Superman, but there was also a book that I read around this time called The Dig, which also had the same plot of these ragtag group of misfits going into space to try to dig into this asteroid to place explosives and blow it up. The book did come out well before Armageddon, and I did a book report on it, and my brother and I shot a video. Josh, if you're watching, I hope that you remember that video that we shot, a little mini movie as part of my book report for school. And boy, if I can find that could be a whole show in itself, talking about the old videos and old movies that we shot for school and otherwise. But I got to see if I can dig that up. Ever since Torch Song, the puns have just been flowing freely through me. But anyway, that was a great, fun book. But that did come out of Armageddon. But this plot also seems a lot like the Armageddon plot. Anyway, that was a major sidetrack. But now back to our show.
The last thing this mission needs is your friends grandstanding.
This episode is a lot of fun. And this is something that we haven't quite dealt with Superman. But I think, again, in reflection to some of my complaints in the first season, is Superman needs greater threats to be able to match his skills. We saw that in Blast from the Past with some other Kryptonians with the same powers. And now we see it again with this giant monster creature that is running amok on the planet. So it's a great force for Superman to have to face. And I think beyond that, the way that this episode is constructed is a lot of fun to watch. And it had this very nostalgic kind of fun feeling to it. It feels a lot like a monster movie, but it also felt a lot like the old Fletcher cartoons, Supermans, which I know, again, I've talked about it before, but that was a great influence to Bruce Timm and the other creators of Batman, the animated series, but also Superman. And in this episode, just the type of villain that he's going up against in this, if you can call the monster a villain, but the antagonist of this story is just very reminiscent of that kind of feel. And this feels like a movie that I'd be watching at a drive-in movie in the 60s.
That's it, Superman. You're almost there.
But I think beyond that, there's another layer to this story, which is my hesitation to call Prometheon a villain, because his only motives is to survive, which again kind of lends itself to some of those monster movies like King Kong, who was just misunderstood, and some of those, even Phantom of the Opera or some of these other monster type movies. Poor big guy is just looking for some food, some heat, some energy, and doesn't understand enough that he's destroying the planet in the process. So it's a neat adversary for Superman to have to go up against.
Its fuel was supposed to be the heat from their suns.
So I found myself, as I was watching this episode, of just enjoying the ride, and in the typical fashion of some of the old monster movies, it was kind of just that. It was a Superman facing off against this giant monster that has no real motives, has no hidden agenda, but is just leaving a wake of destruction in his path. And Superman trying to figure out a way of stopping him. There's a neat little tie-in to the flashback as Hamilton deciphers the code from the alien planet of where he came from. And so a little bit of an element there and some backstory.
The code was simpler than it seemed. They wanted others to translate it.
But other than that, it's just kind of brute force against brute force, which again, in the tone of Superman, that's a little bit more of the style of the animated series and Superman stories in general. So it was fun to watch and go along for the ride, but not a lot of detail to this episode to really dig into or have to analyze in great depth. But I do have to say the very ending of the episode left me kind of wanting more. Not in a good way. A lot of the episodes, both in Batman and Superman, have some sort of tag at the end. And I don't just mean like the foreshadowing things, but either a joke or a couple of lines or some resolution to the episode. And this one ends kind of sort of abruptly and sort of oddly, that they finally get him out into the ocean and they freeze him. There's no lines, no dialogue. Professor and Superman kind of look at each other, and then it just fades off. It felt like there could have been something, like they got to that point and didn't know quite the best resolution, and so they just sort of fade away. So when it comes time to rank this episode, one of the things that I often pride myself on in watching movies or TV shows is I'm usually pretty good at watching things for what they are. What this was a fun monster movie type episode. And so it was fun to watch. But when you look at the rest of the list that it's ranking up against, it doesn't have all the elements that I typically look for in an enjoyable animated show. So it's great for what it is, but it was lacking some of the story that I like. It was lacking some of the moving the characters forward elements and tying into a bigger story. This was a very one-off kind of episode that didn't really tie into other continuity of Superman. And so for those reasons, it kind of falls in the middle of my list at the number 8 spot. Falls just below Feeding Time because that was setting up a villain and a very interesting villain in Parasite, how he operates and his motives and kind of the unlikely villain sort of story. But I do have it beating out Tools of the Trade, although that has some great setup to Darkseid. It the story itself in this fall very flat and wasn't as enjoyable to watch as this episode was.
Hold your fire. I repeat, hold your fire.
So going along with the theme of this episode, what's your favorite monster movie? True monster movie. It doesn't have to be necessarily one of the classics, Godzilla or King Kong. It can be one of the newer ones, but let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed my review of this episode, then please click the like button. And while you're down there, go ahead and hit subscribe because we've got a lot of content coming your way as we're moving our way through Superman the Animated Series Season 2. And we have new episodes coming out every Tuesday and Thursday, so be sure to hit subscribe. Next up, we have the episode Speed Demons with a familiar friend, making an appearance in the episode, so you don't want to miss that. As always, thank you so much for watching. I'm Andy Knode, and I'll see you soon.